When you hear about tanker seizures, sudden sanctions, or emergency OPEC meetings, it can feel like the world is constantly on the edge because of oil. And in many ways it is. But here's what usually gets missed in those headlines.
The United States announced sanctions against Russian oil companies, including oil and natural gas purchase.
This isn't just about fuel prices or corporate profits. It's about power. Who has it, who needs it, and who's willing to fight to protect it. Right at the center of this global tug-of-war sit American oil companies. For over 100 years, their drilling sites, shipping routes, and investment deals have been tightly woven into U.S. foreign policy. When oil flows freely, economies stay calm. When it doesn't, markets panic, alliances strain, and conflicts flare up. That's why a war thousands of miles away or a blockade off a foreign coast can end up hitting your wallet overnight. From the Middle East after World War II, to sanctions on Russia, to today's high-stakes standoff with Venezuela, American oil companies have often moved in lockstep with U.S. strategic goals, sometimes benefiting from government power, other times paying the price for it. And now, even with the U.S. pumping record amounts of oil, these companies are still at the mercy of global politics they can't fully control. So how did private corporations become key players in the world's most dangerous geopolitical battles? Let's explore the story and follow the oil trail from the very beginning. To understand why oil equals power, you have to stop thinking of it as just fuel and start seeing it as leverage. Oil doesn't just run cars and factories, it runs armies, supply chains, and entire economies. When oil flows smoothly, countries stay stable. When it doesn't, prices jump, markets panic, and governments feel the pressure almost immediately. That's what makes oil different from almost every other commodity on Earth. This reality shaped U.S. global strategy long before today's headlines. After World War II, America realized that winning the peace depended on energy. Europe and Japan were rebuilding from ruins, and without reliable oil, their recovery would fail. So, securing access to oil, especially from the Middle East, became a core U.S. objective. It wasn't only about American consumption, it was about keeping allies strong and preventing rivals from using energy shortages as a weapon. History shows how quickly oil shocks turn into global crises. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, attacks on tankers sent oil prices soaring worldwide. Decades later, in 2022, sanctions on Russian oil after the invasion of Ukraine disrupted global supply again, driving up prices and reminding everyone how fragile the system still is. A conflict in one region can ripple across the entire world in days. Because of this, U.S. foreign policy focused on three clear goals: keep oil flowing, support friendly governments in oil-rich regions, and stop any rival power from controlling those resources. This wasn't hidden or accidental. It became the foundation of the post-war global order enforced through alliances, military presence, and economic pressure. And to make all of this work in the real world, the United States relied heavily on its oil companies, which shows how corporate interests and geopolitics became inseparable. Once oil became central to U.S. power, American companies didn't just follow foreign policy, they became part of how it worked. Firms like Exxon, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips spread across the globe, drilling, refining, and shipping oil in regions where politics were often unstable. Their presence helped secure supply, but it also tied their fortunes directly to U.S. diplomacy, sanctions, and military decisions. Nowhere is this clearer than Venezuela. U.S. oil companies have been operating there for nearly a century. After nationalization pushed them out, they were invited back in the 1990s, only to be sidelined again under Hugo Chavez. Today, Chevron is the last major American company left, and it's not a minor player. Chevron alone accounts for roughly 25% of Venezuela's oil exports, operating under special U.S. licenses that can be tightened or revoked at any time. This makes oil companies both beneficiaries and hostages of state power. When Washington turns up the pressure, corporations feel it instantly. That pressure became very real when U.S. forces seized oil tankers and ordered a blockade around Venezuela, officially to enforce sanctions and stop illicit oil shipments. But underneath that action is a much bigger calculation. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world, yet production has collapsed from about 3.6 million barrels a day 25 years ago to roughly 1 million today. U.S. officials increasingly view the country not just as an economic failure, but as a strategic problem, an opening for Russian and Chinese influence in America's backyard. Some in Washington openly discuss regime change, hoping a new government would reopen oil sector to American capital and technology. For oil companies, this creates a brutal reality. Opportunity depends on political alignment. Risk explodes when diplomacy turns hostile. Their drilling plans, profits, and even survival hinge on decisions made far from oil fields in places like the White House and the Pentagon. But military pressure and sanctions are only one side of this struggle. The next battleground is quieter, economic, and just as dangerous for American oil companies. When people think about energy geopolitics, they picture warships, blockades, and sanctions. But for American oil companies, some of the hardest hits come from spreadsheets, not missiles. Trade policy, tariffs, and price decisions made in foreign capitals can reshape their business just as fast as a military crisis. Take steel tariffs. When the U.S. imposed tariffs on imported steel, there were no exemptions for the specialized pipes used in oil drilling. That matters because drilling is steel-heavy. Studies suggest those tariffs raise the cost of key steel inputs for the oil and gas sector by about 5.6%. That may not sound dramatic, but in an industry where profits are measured per barrel, a few percentage points can decide whether a new well gets drilled or shelved. For companies, that means delaying projects, cutting investment, or shifting operations overseas. Then there's OPEC. Decisions made in Riyadh or Vienna directly shape the reality for shale producers in Texas and North Dakota. When OPEC Plus floods the market with oil, prices fall. For U.S. policymakers chasing low energy prices to support manufacturing and power energy-hungry data centers, that can look like a win. But for oil companies, sustained low prices are dangerous. If prices stay down too long, drilling slows, workers are laid off, and future production is put at risk. This creates a sharp contradiction. The U.S. is now the world's largest oil producer, pumping a record 13.8 million barrels a day. That energy abundance gives Washington confidence to pressure rivals like Venezuela or Iran, assuming domestic output will protect consumers from price spikes. But companies don't live in theory, they live in markets. Global supply decisions, OPEC politics, and sudden trade rules still hit their balance sheets hard. So even as America flexes its energy power, its oil companies remain exposed to forces they can't control. And that tension is pushing U.S. energy strategy to evolve beyond crude oil and toward new fuels and new forms of influence. The future of American energy geopolitics isn't only about crude oil anymore. The chessboard is expanding, and the next big pieces aren't tanks or oil rigs. They are supply chains, shipping routes, and the fuels that move quietly through them. One of the most important of those fuels is liquefied petroleum gas, or LPG, propane and butane. The United States has become a major LPG exporter, and that carries real geopolitical weight. In many parts of Africa and South Asia, millions of people still rely on wood or coal for cooking and heating. LPG offers a cleaner, more reliable alternative, and when the U.S. supplies it, influence follows. This isn't aid or charity, it's trade that builds long-term partnerships, especially in regions where China is also competing for economic and political ground. What makes this shift different is who's in control. Unlike traditional oil diplomacy, LPG trade isn't run by governments or enforced by navies. It's managed by global trading firms that move cargoes across oceans, reroute shipments when a canal is blocked, or adjust supply when war disrupts a region. These companies act like shock absorbers for the global energy system, keeping fuel moving even when politics get messy. This changes how power is projected. American influence now travels through contracts, logistics, and reliability, not just military presence. A steady LPG supply can mean warmer homes, cleaner kitchens, and more stable local economies. And that creates goodwill that lasts longer than any sanctions package. Seen this way, American oil companies and energy firms more broadly tell the story of U.S. foreign policy over the last 100 years. They helped secure post-war allies, became pressure points in modern conflicts, and now operate in a world where influence is measured by who can deliver energy when it's needed most. So the next time oil prices jump or a tanker makes the news, remember, this isn't just about fuel. It's about power, strategy, and who controls the lifelines of the global economy.